It's a strange thing human beings can be given something extraordinary, something genuine, something pure, and yet they throw it away. And often, it's not because they don't see its value, but because seeing that value requires responsibility. Real love is a terrifying thing. It demands honesty, sacrifice, and a willingness to confront your own flaws. Real love requires responsibility, and that is precisely why it is so rare and so easily destroyed. When you truly enter into a relationship that carries the weight of love, you are not simply indulging in emotion or desire, you are taking on a task. Love is not a fleeting feeling. It is not a momentary rush of chemistry or attraction. It is a decision, a contract of sorts with the deepest parts of yourself and with another human being. To engage with real love is to admit that you are no longer sufficient unto yourself, that you cannot exist merely as an isolated individual concerned only with your own gratification. Real love demands that you become accountable for the well-being of someone else, that you shoulder a portion of their suffering, and that you bind yourself to a responsibility greater than your immediate impulses. Responsibility is heavy. It is frightening. It requires you to grow beyond your limitations and to face your own flaws. This is where many people falter, and this is where narcissists collapse entirely. Because to accept responsibility for love means to admit that you are not perfect, that you cannot manipulate reality into always serving you, and that the person you claim to care about is not an extension of your ego, but an independent being whose needs and vulnerabilities must matter to you. Love calls for humility. It calls for a recognition that life is not only about you. And that recognition is unbearable for those who have built their identity on pride, control, and the constant assertion of superiority. When you are truly responsible for love, you cannot treat the other person as an accessory. You cannot reduce them to a reflection that makes you feel better about yourself. You must see them as they are, in their fragility, in their imperfection. And you must decide that their worth is not conditional on how well they serve your image. Real love forces you to look at another person in the fullness of their humanity, and to remain when it is difficult, to protect when it is inconvenient, and to nurture when you would rather withdraw. This is why responsibility and love are inseparable. Without responsibility, love collapses into self-interest disguised as affection. Without responsibility, love becomes exploitation, an arrangement designed to feed the ego instead of sustain the soul. Narcissists in particular recoil from this demand. They want the feeling of being adored, but not the burden of being accountable. They want the image of connection without the substance of sacrifice. They want the thrill of love's intensity, but not the discipline of love's labor. Responsibility in love means you are bound to tell the truth, even when it exposes you. It means you cannot use deceit to protect your own image while undermining the trust that the relationship requires. It means you must confront your selfishness, your envy, your anger, and your pride, because those things will poison love if left unchecked. And the narcissist cannot tolerate that kind of confrontation. For them, the preservation of self-image is more important than the preservation of truth, and the preservation of control is more important than the preservation of intimacy. But here is the paradox: without responsibility, there can be no love at all. You cannot receive what you are unwilling to protect. You cannot keep what you refuse to nurture. And so, those who run from responsibility and love inevitably find themselves running from love itself. They imagine that freedom from responsibility is liberation, but it is only emptiness. Because what they gain in the absence of responsibility is nothing compared to what they lose in the absence of love. To love someone is to bear their pain when necessary, to celebrate their joy as your own, and to act with integrity even when it costs you. That is responsibility, and it is the soil in which love takes root. The truth is, people underestimate the depth of responsibility required. It is not just about being faithful in action. It is about being faithful in thought, in intention, in daily discipline. It is about being aware that your choices reverberate into the life of another person who has trusted you. Real love demands you step outside of selfishness again and again, that you discipline the chaotic forces within you that would rather betray, deceive, or abandon when things grow difficult. It is about resisting the temptation to retreat into yourself, to indulge in your pride, to chase novelty instead of committing to depth. Real love binds you to responsibility, because without it there can be no stability, no trust, no foundation upon which intimacy can be built. And the weight of this is not a curse, It is the very thing that gives love its power. It is because love requires responsibility that it transforms you. It forces you to grow into someone who can be relied upon, someone who can be trusted, someone who can give as well as receive. Responsibility is the crucible in which love becomes more than a fleeting desire, in which it becomes enduring, meaningful, and capable of weathering storms. The refusal of responsibility is not freedom, it is the slow erosion of everything that makes love possible. The acceptance of responsibility is what transforms love into the highest form of human connection. Narcissists avoid self-confrontation because to face themselves honestly would unravel the entire foundation upon which they have built their identity. The image they present to the world is carefully constructed, often fragile beneath the surface, but presented as unshakable. To truly look inward requires admitting weakness, flaws, mistakes, and failures, and for the narcissist, these admissions are unbearable. Self-confrontation is the beginning of growth, but it is also the beginning of accountability, and accountability means responsibility. It is far easier to deflect, to project, to blame others, than it is to stand in the mirror of truth and acknowledge that the chaos in your relationships, the pain in your past, the loneliness that follows you, all of it, has something to do with you. This avoidance is not merely accidental, it is deliberate. Narcissists spend much of their energy building defenses against reality. They create narratives where they are the victim or the hero, but never the cause of destruction. They rewrite history in their minds so that betrayal looks like self-protection, abandonment looks like strength, and cruelty looks like justice. To confront themselves would mean dismantling those narratives, and that is terrifying because it would expose the emptiness beneath the mask. Real self-examination demands humility, and humility threatens the very core of narcissistic pride. The thought of being ordinary, of being flawed, of being someone who needs to apologize and take responsibility is so intolerable that they would rather live in delusion than face the truth. Self-confrontation also means acknowledging the pain they cause others. To look inwards honestly is to see not only your own wounds, but also the wounds you have inflicted. Narcissists often surround themselves with people who try to love them, who sacrifice, who forgive, who endure. And yet, when the relationship collapses, the narcissist avoids looking at the devastation they have left behind. Because to admit that you destroyed someone's trust, that you took advantage of their love, that you manipulated and discarded them, that knowledge requires a conscience capable of guilt. And guilt is something the narcissist fights to escape. They prefer to shift the story. You were too sensitive, you were too demanding, you weren't enough. In this way, they turn the mirror away from themselves and place it in the hands of their victim. The refusal of self-confrontation ensures that the narcissist remains trapped. Without facing themselves, they cannot change. Without admitting their patterns, they cannot break them. Without acknowledging their selfishness, they cannot develop empathy. And so the cycle repeats, relationship after relationship, opportunity after opportunity, always ending in the same emptiness, always followed by the same rationalizations. Self-confrontation is the door to transformation, but they keep it locked, because opening it would dismantle the grand illusion of superiority that protects them from feeling weak or vulnerable. This avoidance has deeper consequences than just failed relationships. When a person refuses self-confrontation, they never truly know themselves. They are strangers to their own soul, living in denial of what they are capable of, both good and bad. They chase admiration because it distracts them from inner emptiness. They demand control because it prevents others from getting close enough to see their fears. They hide behind anger because anger shields them from the vulnerability of pain. But underneath, there is always an unacknowledged awareness that something is missing. They cannot sit alone in silence without feeling restless, because silence threatens to expose the truth they have buried. To avoid self-confrontation is also to avoid responsibility for growth. People who face themselves learn. They see their shortcomings, and though painful, they adjust. They apologize when they are wrong. They repair what they have broken, and they slowly become stronger and more trustworthy. This is the natural process of maturity. But for the narcissist, this process is intolerable because it demands humility. It requires admitting that they are not always right, that they need others, that they depend on love and trust like everyone else. Instead, they retreat into arrogance, claiming they are above others, when in reality, their avoidance of self-confrontation keeps them weaker. more fragile, and more dependent on illusions than those who have the courage to face themselves honestly. Even in moments of collapse, when everything falls apart, the narcissist will resist turning inward. They may feel the sting of loneliness, the emptiness of lost love, the weight of rejection, but instead of asking, "What have I done? What must I change?" they ask, "Who can I blame? Who failed me? Who refused to give me what I deserved?" This inability to face themselves is precisely why regret comes too late. They will often only begin to feel the edges of self-confrontation when it can no longer repair the damage they have done, when the love is gone, when the bridge is burned, when the people who once endured them have finally walked away. Self-confrontation is the act of standing naked before truth, stripped of excuses and lies. It is frightening, but it is also liberating, because only through it can you grow. Narcissists reject that liberation because it requires surrendering the false power of their image. They fear that if they admit their flaws, they will be destroyed. What they do not understand is that refusing to confront themselves destroys them slowly, day by day, leaving them isolated, mistrusted, and incapable of real love. Admiration cannot replace authenticity, and yet so many people, especially those who thrive on external validation, pursue admiration as though it were the ultimate goal of human connection. To be admired feels intoxicating. It gives a sense of power, a sense of worth, and a temporary illusion of being significant. People look at you, they speak well of you, they approve of you, and in those moments you feel seen. But admiration is shallow, it is fragile, and it cannot sustain a soul that longs for genuine intimacy. Authenticity is what nourishes real love, while admiration only feeds ego. The problem lies in confusing the two, in thinking that admiration can substitute for authenticity, when in reality they are not only different but opposed. When someone seeks admiration, they are seeking to be elevated, to be placed on a pedestal. They want to be looked at, not looked into. Admiration thrives on distance because it requires an image to project. You cannot admire someone fully when you are too close, because closeness reveals flaws. Authenticity, however, thrives on proximity because it is born out of truth. To be authentic is to allow another person to see you not as an idealized figure, but as a real human being, flawed, imperfect, vulnerable, and yet still worthy of love. This is the foundation of real relationships, not a curated image, but a shared truth. The tragedy is that admiration often seduces people away from authenticity. Narcissists, in particular, live off admiration like it is oxygen. They craft identities, personas, and masks that elicit praise, but beneath these masks they are hollow. They crave being seen as strong, brilliant, attractive, or untouchable, but they fear being seen as human, broken, insecure, or afraid. They avoid authenticity because authenticity threatens the image they have worked so hard to maintain. And yet, in rejecting authenticity, they also reject the very possibility of real love, because love is built not on illusion but on truth. Admiration can never replace authenticity because admiration is about control, while authenticity is about surrender. When someone admires you, you control the story, you decide what they see, and you filter what you reveal. When you are authentic, you surrender control, you let yourself be known as you are, and you risk being rejected. That risk is what makes authenticity powerful, because if someone accepts you despite your flaws, their love is real. Admiration cannot give that security. Admiration collapses the moment the mask cracks, the moment the image is disturbed, the moment the truth slips through. This is why relationships built on admiration inevitably collapse. If you are loved only for your image, then you are not loved at all. You are worshipped as long as the mask holds, but abandoned when the reality breaks through. Authenticity is the only thing that creates a love capable of enduring trials, because authenticity reveals the whole person, not just the projection. When two people are authentic with one another, they are building trust on the foundation of truth, not fantasy. That trust can withstand conflict, disappointment, and imperfection because it was never built on perfection to begin with. Those who pursue admiration over authenticity are often left bewildered when their relationships disintegrate. They believe they were adored, and they were, but only in part. They were never truly known, and therefore never truly loved. This is a hollow kind of existence, always performing, always curating, always seeking applause, but never feeling secure. Because deep down they know that if people saw the truth, the admiration would vanish. That fear eats away at them, leaving them constantly defensive, constantly anxious about maintaining their image, constantly in search of the next person to validate them. Authenticity, by contrast, requires courage. It demands that you stop performing and start revealing. It means acknowledging your flaws openly, admitting your failures, and allowing others to see the parts of you that you would rather hide. It means saying, "This is who I am, imperfect but real." And when you do that, you create the possibility of love that is not dependent on performance, not contingent on image, but grounded in reality. That love has depth. That love has endurance. That love can survive the storms of life because it is not built on illusion. Narcissists resist authenticity because it threatens their entire strategy of existence. Their lives are built around admiration, around being larger than life, around being untouchable. To be authentic would mean being vulnerable, and vulnerability feels like death to them. But what they do not realize is that the absence of authenticity is already killing them, slowly depriving them of the one thing that admiration can never provide: real connection. You can be admired by a crowd and still feel utterly alone because admiration never fills the soul. Only authenticity creates the intimacy that brings peace, security, and belonging. The pursuit of admiration without authenticity leads to a cycle of emptiness. You achieve the admiration, you feel the temporary high, and then you feel the inevitable emptiness when it fades. So you chase more admiration, and the cycle repeats. But it is never enough, because admiration cannot give what authenticity gives. Admiration is external, fleeting, and fragile. Authenticity is internal, enduring, and strong. The human soul is not nourished by applause. It is nourished by truth and by the experience of being loved for who you actually are, not for the role you play. To substitute admiration for authenticity is to trade reality for illusion, depth for shallowness, and security for fragility. It may feel powerful in the moment, but it is hollow in the end. Only authenticity can sustain love, because only authenticity makes you truly known, and only when you are truly known can you be truly loved. Escaping truth leads to self-destruction, because truth is the foundation upon which a meaningful life is built. When someone chooses to deny or avoid truth, they are not escaping reality itself. They are only creating a distorted version of it that will eventually collapse. The human psyche is not designed to live in lies without consequence. Lies can provide temporary comfort. They can shield a person from immediate pain, but they always come at a cost. They distort perception, corrode trust, and create a fragile existence that cannot withstand the pressures of time and reality. The deeper the lies go, the greater the collapse when truth inevitably breaks through. For narcissists, escaping truth becomes a way of life. They twist reality to protect their fragile sense of self. Instead of acknowledging failure, they blame others. Instead of confronting their cruelty, they rationalize it as strength. Instead of admitting loss, they convince themselves it was never valuable to begin with. This constant denial of truth is their method of survival, but it is also the seed of their destruction. Each distortion may preserve their image temporarily, but it separates them further and further from reality until they live in a world that no longer corresponds with what actually is. That disconnection ensures that their relationships fail, their opportunities slip away, and their ability to experience real love vanishes. The avoidance of truth is often driven by fear. Truth exposes vulnerability. It reveals weakness, mistakes, and shortcomings. For those who cannot tolerate seeing themselves as imperfect, truth feels unbearable. And yet that very avoidance guarantees a greater kind of suffering, because when you build a life on illusions, it cannot hold when tested. A relationship based on lies crumbles under the weight of conflict. A self-image based on denial shatters when confronted with failure. A worldview built on deception collapses when reality refuses to conform. Escaping truth may feel easier in the short term, but in the long term, it dismantles the very possibility of stability and fulfillment. When someone continually avoids truth, they lose the ability to grow. Growth requires seeing yourself clearly, recognizing your mistakes, and taking responsibility. To escape truth is to escape growth, and to escape growth is to remain trapped in immaturity. Narcissists cling to the illusion of superiority, but by refusing to face the truth, they never become stronger. They remain weak beneath the surface, always dependent on others' validation, always vulnerable to exposure, always anxious about the mask slipping. The refusal of truth keeps them chained to insecurity, no matter how confident they appear outwardly. The destruction caused by escaping truth does not stop at the individual, it spreads outward. Lies fracture relationships because trust is impossible without truth. People who escape truth cannot be relied upon because they will always distort reality to protect themselves. Those around them are left confused, gaslighted, and betrayed until eventually they walk away. The narcissist may then convince themselves that others were disloyal, that they were abandoned unfairly, but in reality, it was the denial of truth that poisoned the connection. In this way, the refusal of truth ensures loneliness, because no relationship can endure in the absence of honesty. Escaping truth also creates an internal war. The human conscience cannot be silenced completely. Deep down, people know when they are lying to themselves, even if they bury it beneath layers of rationalization. That hidden awareness creates tension, anxiety, and emptiness. Narcissists who live constantly in distortion often experience this as a gnawing dissatisfaction. No matter how much admiration they collect, no matter how carefully they maintain their image, something inside them whispers that it is not enough, because it is not real. That whisper grows louder with time, often manifesting as restlessness, anger, or despair. The very act of escaping truth ensures that peace remains out of reach. The destruction becomes clearest in the moments of collapse. When the lies can no longer hold, when the mask is shattered, when reality finally breaks through, the pain of facing the truth is magnified by years of avoidance. The narcissist who refuses to acknowledge the value of love will one day realize it is gone forever, and the regret will be unbearable. The person who lied to maintain superiority will one day face undeniable failure, and the humiliation will cut deeper than it would have if truth had been confronted earlier. Escaping truth does not eliminate suffering, it multiplies it. There is also a spiritual dimension to this reality. Human beings are wired for meaning, and meaning cannot exist apart from truth. To live in lies is to live in fragmentation, disconnected from yourself, from others, and from reality itself. Authentic existence requires the courage to see things as they are, even when painful. Escaping truth may provide temporary comfort, but it robs life of authenticity, depth, and meaning. Over time, that absence of meaning becomes destructive, leaving a person hollow, bitter, and lost. The irony is that those who escape truth believe they are protecting themselves. They imagine that by avoiding uncomfortable realities, they are sparing themselves pain. In reality, they are ensuring that the pain will be greater when it comes. Truth has a way of resurfacing, and when it does, it demands to be acknowledged. To spend years running from it is to ensure that when it finally catches up, the destruction it brings will be far more devastating than if it had been faced from the beginning. Love demands sacrifice, not entitlement. And this is one of the most difficult truths for people to accept. Real love is not about what you receive, it is about what you are willing to give. It is not about securing endless attention, admiration, or service from another person. It is about laying down parts of yourself for the sake of the relationship, for the sake of the one you claim to care for. Sacrifice does not mean losing yourself entirely, but it does mean recognizing that the bond you share is more important than the selfish impulses that rise within you. Love flourishes where there is giving, patience, and humility, not where there is constant taking, demanding, and expecting. Entitlement is the opposite of love. Entitlement says, "You owe me." It assumes that another person's devotion is a permanent guarantee, that their kindness is an obligation rather than a gift. Entitlement takes the sacrifices of others for granted, exploiting them rather than valuing them. This mentality destroys love, because love can only exist in freedom. If someone is pressured, manipulated, or guilted into giving, it is no longer love, it is control. Entitlement corrupts relationships by replacing gratitude with expectation and appreciation with demand. The moment love becomes something owed rather than something cherished, it begins to die. Sacrifice in love means choosing to put the other person before yourself, not in every moment without exception, but in the crucial moments where selfishness would destroy connection. It is staying when it would be easier to walk away. It is forgiving when resentment feels justified. It is listening when you would rather be heard. It is admitting fault when pride tempts you to argue. These acts of sacrifice are not grand gestures, they are often small daily decisions that slowly weave a fabric of trust and devotion. Without them, love remains shallow and fragile. With them, love grows resilient and enduring. Narcissists fail to understand this because their relationships are built on entitlement. They believe love is something they deserve simply by existing, something that should revolve around their needs, their desires, their validation. They crave loyalty, but they will not sacrifice for it. They demand devotion, but they will not give it. To them, Love is a stage upon which they perform and are admired, not a space of mutual surrender and sacrifice. This entitlement blinds them to the reality that love is not infinite when unreciprocated. A partner may give endlessly for a time, but without sacrifice in return, the well eventually runs dry. The narcissist is left bewildered, asking why the love disappeared, never realizing that it was their refusal to give that drained it away. Sacrifice also means carrying responsibility for the pain of another person. When you love someone, their suffering becomes yours in some measure. You cannot remain indifferent when they hurt, and you cannot detach when they struggle. To love is to be bound to the burdens of another soul, to willingly share in the weight they carry. This is not convenient, and it is not easy, but it is essential. A relationship without shared sacrifice is not a relationship at all. It is merely an arrangement of convenience. Entitlement refuses this burden. It insists that the other person carry their struggles alone while continuing to provide comfort and attention. Such imbalance cannot endure. The depth of love is revealed most clearly in moments of sacrifice. When you put aside your own comfort for someone else, you are showing that they matter to you more than your immediate desire. This does not weaken you, it strengthens you. Sacrifice transforms love into something sacred because it shows that the bond is worth more than convenience. Anyone can love when things are easy. Real love is proven when it costs you something: your pride, your comfort, your time, your energy. Those costs are what make love real because they are evidence that you are invested in something greater than yourself. Entitlement, by contrast, breeds bitterness. When someone feels entitled to endless devotion, they will always feel disappointed because no human being can fulfill another's every demand. Entitlement sets standards that are impossible to meet and punishes the other person for failing to be perfect. Sacrifice, however, creates gratitude. When you sacrifice for someone, you begin to appreciate their sacrifices more deeply because you understand what it costs. Gratitude strengthens love. Entitlement poisons it. Gratitude sees the other person as a gift. Entitlement sees them as a servant. Sacrifice also requires honesty. To sacrifice means to reveal your own weakness, to admit that you cannot do everything on your own, that you need someone else. It demands humility, because to truly love, you must allow yourself to depend on another. Narcissists reject this, because dependence feels like vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens their sense of control. They refuse to sacrifice because they fear it makes them weak, not realizing that the refusal to sacrifice is what leaves them hollow and fragile. Real strength is not found in demanding endlessly, but in giving generously. Real love is not found in entitlement, but in the quiet sacrifices that build trust, intimacy, and loyalty over time. Love's power is inseparable from sacrifice. Without sacrifice, love is nothing more than desire dressed up as devotion. Without sacrifice, love is fragile, transactional, and destined to break under pressure. Entitlement erodes love because it places the self above the bond, but sacrifice strengthens it by placing the bond above the self. Sacrifice is what transforms love from a fleeting emotion into a lasting commitment, from a shallow connection into a profound union. Genuine connection exposes vulnerability because to be truly connected with another person is to let down the defenses that shield you from being seen as you really are. Most people spend much of their lives carefully managing how others perceive them. They hide their insecurities, disguise their fears, and present only the aspects of themselves that feel safe to reveal. But genuine connection cannot exist where there is only performance. It is born in the raw spaces where you stop pretending and allow someone else to encounter your unguarded self. Vulnerability is not a weakness in this context. It is the essence of authenticity, and without it, relationships remain shallow, fragile, and incapable of enduring the storms of life. To expose vulnerability means risking rejection. That is why so many people avoid it. If you reveal your flaws, your wounds, your doubts, you open the possibility that the other person may not accept you. They may leave, they may criticize, they may use what you revealed against you. The fear of that outcome drives people to maintain barriers, to show only the parts of themselves that seem acceptable. But those barriers also prevent intimacy. You cannot be fully loved unless you are fully known, and you cannot be fully known unless you are willing to be vulnerable. The paradox is that the very thing people fear, showing weakness, is the only thing that allows them to experience love in its truest form. Narcissists recoil from vulnerability because it threatens the core of their identity. Their entire way of being is built on control, on appearing untouchable, on crafting an image that others admire. Vulnerability shatters that image. It reveals insecurity, dependency, imperfection, all of which are intolerable to someone who survives on the illusion of superiority. For them, to be vulnerable is to lose power, and losing power feels like annihilation. So they resist genuine connection because genuine connection demands precisely the thing they are unwilling to offer. They may mimic intimacy, they may perform affection, but they do not surrender the defenses that protect their ego. Without vulnerability, though, what they offer is only imitation, not real connection. In a healthy relationship, vulnerability is mutual. Both people open themselves to being known, both share their fears and insecurities, both allow the other into places they could easily keep hidden. This mutual exposure creates trust because it says, I am letting you see the parts of me that are fragile, and I am trusting you not to exploit them. When this trust is honored, the bond deepens beyond surface attraction or convenience. It becomes rooted in reality, in the knowledge that both partners are seen and accepted as they are. This is the soil in which love grows strong because it is built on truth rather than illusion. Vulnerability also creates compassion. When you allow someone to see your pain, you give them the opportunity to empathize, to understand you not as a perfect being, but as a human who struggles like they do. This shared humanity is what softens the heart, what dissolves pride, and what makes forgiveness possible. Without vulnerability, people remain distant, unable to touch each other's hearts because the walls are too high. Narcissists never allow these walls to come down, and as a result, they never experience the compassion that comes from true intimacy. They remain admired perhaps, desired maybe, but never truly known or deeply loved. The exposure of vulnerability is also a mirror. When you reveal yourself, you give the other person permission to do the same. One act of honesty can invite another. One admission of fear can open the door for someone else to admit theirs. This reciprocity creates a bond that admiration and performance can never achieve. It builds a relationship where both people feel safe enough to be human rather than pressured to be perfect. Without that safety, love is suffocated by performance, always fragile, always on edge, always one mistake away from collapse. It is in moments of vulnerability that the true nature of a relationship is tested. When you confess a failure, when you show your weakness, when you admit your fear, the way the other person responds reveals whether the connection is genuine. If they respond with cruelty, judgment, or indifference, then the bond was never real. If they respond with understanding, with patience, with loyalty, then you know the connection is authentic. Vulnerability is the doorway to this revelation. Without it, you can never know whether the love you are receiving is real or conditional. For narcissists, avoiding vulnerability means avoiding this test entirely. They would rather not risk being exposed, so they remain behind the mask. But in doing so, they ensure that they will never know if the love directed at them is for who they are or for who they pretend to be. They live perpetually uncertain, always doubting, always anxious, because deep down they know that what is being loved is not their true self. Genuine connection requires the courage to face that uncertainty and risk rejection. The reward is the possibility of love that